there's 1.3 million people in Prague, 21 million Bitcoin, already you start to realize, wait, there's way less than 1 Bitcoin per person. So then the question is, how little of a Bitcoin is there per person? It's actually quite little. If you take the whole number, 21 million, or you divide it by 8 billion human beings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah, right? 21 million, 8 billion people, that's roughly 236,000 what are called Satoshis. What are Satoshis? I thought we were talking about Bitcoin. Bitcoin, you can think of like dollars. So for $150 US, you can buy approximately the same amount of Bitcoin there is per human being on the planet. Now, for the city of Prague, that means that if you take those 1.3 million people, each one, the 236,000 Satoshis, that's only about 3,000 Bitcoins for the entire city. So that might sound like a lot, it might not sound like a lot, depending where your bias is, but it's actually not a lot. 3,000 Bitcoins is only a couple $100 million.
180.
So if you think you're too late to Bitcoin...
A lot of people are thinking, okay, how much is Bitcoin going to be worth in the future? How much is it going to cost to buy that cathedral, that church behind us? And how much Bitcoin am I going to need to get rich? I got a lot of thoughts on that topic, and I know Luke does as well.
In this city of Prague here, there are 1.309 million people or so. There's just over 1.3 million people, barely. And there's only 21 million Bitcoin ever to be created. So just from an initial thought experiment, it makes perfect sense already. Like, oh, wait, there's 1.3 million people. There's 1.3 million people in Prague, 21 million Bitcoin. Already you start to realize, wait, there's way less than 1 Bitcoin per person. So then the question is, how little of a Bitcoin is there per person? It's actually quite little. If you take the whole number, 21 million, and you divide it by 8 billion human beings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah, right? 21 million, 8 billion people, that's roughly 236,000 what are called Satoshis. What are Satoshis? I thought we were talking about Bitcoin. Bitcoin, you can think of like dollars. Satoshis, you can think of like cents. So there are many, many Satoshis within 1 Bitcoin. And so what does 236,000 Satoshis cost at the time?
Like $100 bucks, $150.
Yeah, about $150. So for $150 US, you can buy approximately the same amount of Bitcoin there is per human being on the planet. Now, for the city of Prague, that means that if you take those 1.3 million people, each one, the 236,000 Satoshis, that's only about 3,000 Bitcoins for the entire city. So that might sound like a lot, it might not sound like a lot, depending where your bias is, but it's actually not a lot. 3,000 Bitcoins is only a couple $100 million.
180.
Yeah, so...
Or 1.8.
Yeah, so that's the question. Is it a good deal or a bad deal to buy the entire city of Prague for a couple $100 million? I mean, it's not that bad of a deal, right? And so the same way to your personal life, if you could buy all of the wealth you own for $150, if you could rebuy it back, it's actually not that bad of a deal, right? And actually, it's much more optimistic than that, because that's assuming a straight, even distribution. The reality is that it's not that straight. And so the long story short is that Bitcoin might feel like it's too expensive because one whole coin is tens of thousands of dollars, soon to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. But at the end of the day, you can buy more than your share of the network for literally the price of a single dinner or of a single lunch afternoon, right? Even $150 is multiple times more than what actually is realistically going to be available per person. And so if you think you're too late to Bitcoin, that's all you need to keep in mind, is that just buying $50, $100 and storing it properly for a long period of time is probably going to be very sufficient in the future, right? But of course you realize, well, the more Bitcoin you buy, the sooner in time that sufficient future will be, right? The more money you have, the sooner you can retire, right? The sooner you can get rich or whatever, right? So anyway, hopefully that's of some explanation to people, but these conversations are very interesting because it followed those 3 steps I've seen continuously with hundreds of people, right? The first statement is, I don't know anything. The second one is, we can't fix inflation, and therefore Bitcoin also can't fix it. And then the third one is, okay, maybe it can fix it, but I'm still too late, right? Those are the 3 things that I've seen personally, so...
Couldn't agree more, dude. I think not enough people understand Bitcoin's scarcity. Most people think they're late to Bitcoin. Most people say Bitcoin's gone from $0 to $66,000 over the past 15 years. It's too late to Bitcoin. I can't buy a whole Bitcoin. And I think the 2 biggest things people don't understand is that only 0.1% of the world today has properly adopted Bitcoin and taken self-custody of their Bitcoin. I know you're even more bullish than me.
Well, yes and no.
You think it's even earlier and even fewer people have adopted Bitcoin?
Well, I am more bullish, which for those who don't know means optimistic on price, and in some ways I'm more bearish, which means pessimistic on price than you. You are more bullish or optimistic in the timeline. I think I am more bullish in how early we are, right? So you think we're farther along than I do, and I think it's going to take longer than you do, which, that seems very congruent to me, right? I think we're earlier and it's going to take longer. That kind of makes sense. And then vice versa, you think we're later on, it's going to be quicker. So anyway, it's just a difference of opinion.
to the really kick
Yeah,
up
yeah.
in the S-curve.
You think we're a lot closer, right? I think we've got an extra, good bit longer than I think you believe. But anyway, the same direction. It's the same direction, right? You think that roughly 1 in 1,000 people own Bitcoin. I think it's more like 1 in 2,000. If people want to get rich, they have to first identify what they're trying to do. They're not trying to get more stuff. They're trying to get more time, right? I think it's a cheap, childlike kind of wealth to want more stuff, right? Kids want more stuff because kids are immature because they can't make their own decisions. But adults that are mature, that can make their own decisions, are mature enough to realize that what they really want is time, right? You can get more stuff forever. You can get a nicer car. You can get a bigger house. You can get whatever. But the thing you can't get more of is time, right? We have another hour that has just passed, right? And so that's the ultimate thing. So if you view it in that way, how do I get more time? Well, then you have to understand what Bitcoin is. What Bitcoin is it's basically a kind of time-traveling energy. You can teleport time from the present or the past into the future, right? So basically, when you're buying any amount of Bitcoin, doesn't matter how little, you're buying a fixed percentage of the Bitcoin network.
You're going to have to explain that point of how Bitcoin is time travel. I know the people are going to want to know.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. So if you buy a fraction of Bitcoin, you're buying a fraction of the Bitcoin network. Now, the Bitcoin network is not worth a lot right now, but if in the future the Bitcoin network is worth more, you still own that same fraction of the Bitcoin network. So let's take the city of Prague here. The city of Prague is, millennia old. It's very old, right? So if we were to go back in time to this very city square, we don't have these buildings around us. We don't have all these restaurants around it, and all these people are not here, right? This is a much smaller city square, right? So if I'm going to buy a fraction of this city square and then hold that fraction, that percentage of the square into the future, well, now in the present, where we are today, well, I can buy a lot more, right? Maybe 1,000 years ago, that was a wood structured building that was 1 story tall. Now it's a 4 story tall building out of marble and granite and brick, right? So by buying that share of this square in the past and holding it into the future, I have basically taken energy from the future and allocated it to myself by buying that fraction today. Can you spend that energy today? Well, no, and that's kind of where the metaphor breaks down, but I think in principle it's actually very true, right? By time traveling myself to 1,500 years ago to the city square, I can buy 21st century productivity today by buying that fraction, right? And so that's what makes Bitcoin different than buying any stock, right? If you're gonna buy a stock of a company that builds the building, or you're gonna buy the building itself, you have to wait until those entities exist, right? If I'm gonna buy the building itself, I gotta wait until the building's actually built. If I'm gonna buy a share in the company that's going to build the building, I have to wait until that company's founded, right? But by buying a percentage of all productivity of this square, I have bought both the building and the company that's built the building simultaneously in a given fraction, right? So coming back to Bitcoin, how much does it take to get rich? Well, if you're optimistic on the future and you think that the global pie of wealth is going to be larger in the future than today, then you should buy Bitcoin, because then you will get a percentage exposure to that future, right? And it doesn't matter how small your percentage is, it just matters that you buy some of that percentage and you hold it into the future. The only scenario it does not make sense to buy Bitcoin, or where Bitcoin's going to crash or fall in value or potentially go to zero, is a theoretical future where the future is less valuable than the past, right? So let's say I were to buy a share of this square today, of this city square here in Prague. Theoretically, every point in the future, every day out indefinitely, it will be more valuable because there's more buildings built, more restaurants built, and more people flooding the city square here, right? The only scenario that doesn't make sense for me to buy that is if I think that we're going to have some sort of apocalypse or some sort of disaster to where this square is reduced to a pile of rubble, right? And so that's what I mean when I say that Bitcoin is this kind of time-traveling energy, that you can buy the energy of the future today. You can buy the energy of the future today, even though you can't use the energy, you're still buying the rights to it, right? So you don't literally, you can't actually use the innovations of tomorrow today, right? Obviously, because literal time travel doesn't work, but you can buy the property rights to those future innovations and to those future technologies. And I think, even though may seem like a convoluted way of explaining it to people, I think that's a far more important way for people to understand Bitcoin instead of merely a form of number go up, price go up, Bitcoin to 5 million, Bitcoin to 50 million, Bitcoin to 500 billion. I think it's way more appropriate to describe it in terms of being able to buy rights of innovations that have not yet been created, right? And so as long as you're an optimist on humanity as a whole, Bitcoin probably is a smashing buy and is going to be cheap forever.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's an absolutely beautiful answer to the question. It's one that I did not actually expect. I do want to come back to time traveling. I thought the time traveling quote was a really, really interesting one. But I want to quickly mention technology. And I am going to come back to you. And I'm going to have to ask you how much Bitcoin you do need to get rich. I'm going to get an answer out of him. But I want to touch on that point about technology. A lot of people think, when's Bitcoin going to become stable? Bitcoin's going to flatten out and it's going to actually become stable one day at 50 million, or let's say if you're a little bit more bearish, more like $5 million a coin. Now, I disagree with that, and it's because of the point you mentioned. Technology is going to continue to get better and better and better. And unless you're a pessimist on civilization's technological ability, you should buy this beautiful square that's around us today.
Right.
Maybe we should talk a little bit more about, will Bitcoin flatten off in the future or become a little bit more stable? And, let's talk a little bit more about that. Now, I wanted to quickly interrupt today's interview to give a massive shout out to our lead sponsor, Rhino Bitcoin. Rhino is a Bitcoin banking solution that combines traditional financial services with the power of Bitcoin. Created by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners, Rhino offers a range of different services. You can buy Bitcoin, you can sell Bitcoin, you can withdraw straight to cold storage, and you can even pay other people using the Bitcoin Lightning Network. You can also purchase gift cards with sats at the click of a button, and you can even connect a multi-signature setup to Casa, all by using the Rhino application. Additionally, you can even send cash globally to your family and friends using Rhino, and soon you'll be able to pay bills, borrow money against your Bitcoin, and even save Bitcoin for your retirement, all in the one seamless application. You guys can visit rhinobitcoin.com to download Rhino today and experience the future of Bitcoin banking.
Respectfully, I think that the people that think Bitcoin is going to have perpetually diminishing returns in all forms either are ignorant or short-sighted or have a low time horizon. I think it's the intellectually cheap thing to say is that, it makes logical sense to me that Bitcoin starts out volatile and it gets less volatile as it gets bigger. And in some aspects they're right. My disagreement is when they say it in all aspects. To me, there are three different ways to look at it. The first question is, okay, you're saying Bitcoin is going to become less volatile in the future. Are you talking about in nominal terms? Are you talking about in real terms? Or are you talking about in terms of global adoption? To me, those are three very different questions and they have three different answers. The first one I'll address is global adoption. Obviously, it is going to get increasingly diminishing returns on global adoption, right? Going from 0.0001% global adoption to 0.01% adoption is a huge, massive change, both in percentage and in terms of total network value, right? Going from 0.1 adoption to 4% adoption is also a massive move, maybe not quite as large. Going from 4% to 8% is also a large move, but not nearly as large, right? So obviously, the greater percentage of the world economy that's adopting Bitcoin and exiting other inferior forms of monetary storage, obviously that gets diminishing returns over time, right? That aspect obviously does, because you can't go over above 100% of all the humans that are using Bitcoin, right? The other two of those three, I do not believe are ever going to have diminishing returns. To address the nominal one, which is perhaps the more obvious one, is that we are printing more political currency forever. And there are many people that would have difficulty saying that Bitcoin's price is going up exponentially forever. But in nominal terms, I do believe it's going up exponentially forever because there is no limit to how many political currency units we will create. Here in the Czech Republic, right, it does not matter who's in charge. All that matters is that someone is in charge, and there is an incentive for them to print more currency units. There's an incentive for them to create more numbers to extract wealth from others and take wealth from people, right? So there is no limit, right? And a lot of people say, oh, that's fear-mongering. Oh, that's fear porn. Oh, you're being a pessimist. Oh, you hate humanity. Oh, you're rooting for hyperinflation. Oh, you're rooting for World War III. Oh, $1 million Bitcoin be World War III. Blah, blah, blah. All these, again, respectfully, naive or perhaps intentionally ignorant perspectives are explicitly ignoring the fact that in the United States of America, the strongest country in the world, the strongest country in all of human history, with the least bad political currency, the US dollar, ever in history, even in our country, America, the national debt of the United States has increased by a factor of 800,000x. Not the previous currency we had before the dollar that hyperinflated. No, not that. The current dollar. We have had our national debt increase by a factor of 800,000-fold, right? The entire Louisiana Purchase, which is basically the middle third of America, was mere tens of millions of dollars, right? Alaska was mere millions of dollars, right? And you have to ask yourself, wait, why are those prices going up? It's because we have increased the political currency units forever. Granted, it took about 250 years to get that 800,000x, but if we're increasing currency about 3 times faster now than we were 200 years ago, then all of a sudden you begin to realize, wait a second, another 500,000x, 800,000x, or even 1 million x from here in national debt is probably not going to take 250 years. Maybe it takes 200 or 150, or I would argue less than 100 years.
Yeah.
I mean, people really have to think about that. Forget value appreciation for Bitcoin. This kind of gets to the whole less than common with the future than the past idea, right? Like, thousands of years ago, this city square had, 100 times less people, food that was not nearly as good, buildings that were not nearly as beautiful, and frankly, the diversity of both thought and ethnicity here is massive, right? I mean, 1,000 years ago, most people here probably never left their local villages or towns, or maybe they went to a neighboring country, but there are people from all around the planet here, right? So I mean, that's part of the whole time traveling thing, right? It's that not just is the stuff different, but the people are different and they get to enjoy their time here, right? That's kind of what I was saying before about time is your wealth, not stuff, right? So anyway, in regards to the nominal devaluation of the dollar, my point is that if in 250 years, when the majority of that time we were on a gold standard, we still increased our national debt of the United States from under $50 million nominal to $35 trillion. Okay, we are literally adding more unfunded liabilities to the United States of America today every few seconds than the entirety of our national debt 250 years ago. And so you can forget value appreciation for real estate, stocks, Bitcoin, and everything else in the world. Just from a nominal perspective, it is completely illogical to say that we're going to have diminishing returns. We're going from 35 trillion in national debt to 350 trillion to 3.5 quadrillion to 35 quadrillion to 350 quadrillion to 3.5 quintillion to 35 quintillion. I mean, and that might sound like hyperbole to people. That might sound like hyperinflation. But again, if you were to go back to George Washington and say, hey, George boy, the national debt of the United States is going to increase by a factor of 100,000. Oh, and then another 8x from there. He would assume hyperinflation, and yet we have not had hyperinflation in the United States. So you can forget the quote-unquote fear porn or the quote-unquote fear-mongering of hyperinflation in the United States. Just by going from history alone and by going from the facts of where we are, it is illogical to say that we are going to have diminishing returns in terms of a currency that is designed to never have diminishing returns. That's the second point. The third point is that of technological progress, and this is the one that matters the most, right? The first one was adoption. Yes, we're going to have diminishing returns. The second point was nominal price appreciation. Yes, we're going to have exponentially increasing returns. And we have Dogecoin over here.
The girlfriend loves those little cute dogs.
Yes, we have the Dogecoin dog literally right over here. I can't make this up. Oh man, that's adorable. I mean, I'm still not buying it, but still, that's a pretty good argument. But the third point is the most important one, and that is the innovation question, right?
Yep.
Technology is increasing at a faster and faster rate. This is both, in my opinion, good and bad. This has both the optimistic side and the pessimistic side. The optimistic side is that life is getting better and better, right? My life from here over the next 30, 40, 50 years is going to have more economic progress faster than my grandparents had, right? And my grandparents, they had more technological progress in their life than people, thousands of years ago, right? Technology is changing faster and faster within our own lives, right? Now, there are downsides to this, right? One downside is that we have multiple career cycles within a single lifetime, right? People would go 10 generations farming in the exact same way possible. Then there would be some slight change to a farming method, and they would go another 8 generations without changing their farming methods, right? Then, let's say in the Industrial Revolution era, people had one major career change in a lifetime, right? You go from being a farmer to maybe working in a factory, right? And now we're at the point where technology is so fast that over the next 30, 40, 50 years, I literally don't know what to encourage people what career to go into, because most careers today are not going to be around in 30, 40, 50 years, right? I mean, obviously we both have experience in making movies and videos, right? I remember when I started making films when I was 6 years old, that the whole debate was around digital versus film. That's not a debate anymore. We have progressed from the film versus digital debate to the social media versus the theatrical release, right? The CGI debate, right? Now we're at the point where at the very, very beginnings of the whole AI generated filmmaking movement and debate, right? And that's going to be this whole new thing, right? And people will resist it for a while, but the point I'm making is that this is the third aspect to Bitcoin's value appreciation. Technology is objectively getting faster, and those prosperity gains are objectively being created faster. And if Bitcoin is the tokenization of, let's say, all of that productivity, then the actual purchasing power of that productivity is going to accrue to Bitcoin, right? So if I can give a specific example, and Luke, feel free to use this for your clickbait as much as possible, right? And I talk about clickbait and the number nominal of Bitcoin because people need to have the emotional hook in order to understand truly what I think you and I are saying. So one aspect of looking at this, I would argue, is that of space travel, right? Which right now sounds absurd, and frankly it is absurd, right? It's more sci-fi than anything, right? Because sci-fi, emphasis on fi, right? It's fiction, right? Neither you and I have any chance of ever going to, let's say, Mars, right? It's currently estimated that the approximate cost for me to throw you in a rocket here from Prague and launch you to the red planet, to where you're going to go on a one-way trip, by the way, you're going to be dead in a matter of weeks because you'll run out of supplies, it's going to be about $10 billion. Now, I don't have $10 billion, but that's approximately what it would take to create the rocket to then send you to Mars, right? And and then you're going to die when you're there, right? So that's a big problem if you want to go to Mars, right? It's literally impossible for you to do that and live to tell the tale. So at the same time, we have new innovations, right? We have the Artemis program of NASA. We have the Starship program of SpaceX and therefore Elon Musk, right? We have Blue Origin and Jeff Bezos. We have this competition between the private and public sector and between these different billionaires, all trying to innovate to find these ways to get to Mars, right? And this is a question aside from the fact that people personally want to do it or not. The fact remains that probably in the next 20, 30, 50 years, someone's going to figure it out, right? We've seen massive leaps, especially with Starship in the last, half a decade, not even that. We're seeing these massive incremental improvements. And if in the future that the predictions of all of these groups are right, and approximately the ticket for a round trip is about the cost of a house, where you actually live to tell the tale, by the way, how do you price that in? Right? Do you use dollars to price in things that we inherently can't price in? Do you use global adoption to price in things? No, neither of those works. You have to think in terms of absolute purchasing power, right? And so if there are roughly approximately 100 houses on the planet per Bitcoin, which is its own side note of anything, right? One Bitcoin's basically the value of 100 houses in a long enough time horizon in the future. And if we assume that one of these tickets to Mars, theoretically, is about the cost of one house, what I'm trying to say is that means that 100 round trips to Mars, which you inherently can't do today without living to survive the tail, is one Bitcoin, right? For one salary, right? And so this gets back to the time traveling thing, right? It's like, I cannot actually go to Mars today. I cannot actually experience that technological innovation. But what I can do is I can take energy from today.
Buy Bitcoin.
Yes, buy Bitcoin.
Buy Bitcoin.
Buy Bitcoin?
Why?
Yes, why?
Come tell us why. Somebody said buy Bitcoin. We have some guys from BTC Prague who also...
So he was in the Bulgarian Bitcoin conference, and we just ran into him, but his English isn't that good, so he's already a Bitcoiner. We don't need to orange pill him.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. All right, bye.
We are everywhere. I think this is a shining example. Bitcoin is everywhere.
Well, to be fair, there were 6,000 of us 2 days ago, and we're all going to the same exact tourist spots. But, yeah,
it's true.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, the point of my message there is that I could do the easy thing and say that, okay, if a trip today, one-way ticket to Mars is $10 billion, and approximately in the future there could be 100 round-trip tickets for the cost of 1 Bitcoin, is it rational to say that, okay, 100 times 10 billion equals 1 trillion? 1 Bitcoin's worth 1 trillion? Is that reasonable? Yes and no. Like, no, obviously, right? It's only worth $60,000. But at the same time, yes, because buying Bitcoin, you're buying that fraction of future innovation. If you buy 1% of 1 Bitcoin, you're buying that 1% of that Bitcoin in the future, and you're getting access to that technology, right? And people can say that that's mental gymnastics to try to, get big hoping numbers. But again, it comes back to the city square here, right? If we were to teleport 1,000 years ago, and I were to say, Luke, what is the value of you telling a message to 10 people here, right? You get your soapbox and you talk to 10 people and you shout as long as you can, right? Okay, now let's say, Luke, I were to take you into the future. There's going to be this magic box that we call a camera. In fact, there's going to be multiple magic boxes we call cameras, and they're going to have this magic little P, this little black P that we call a microphone, and that's going to capture your sound, sync it up with the camera that records a visual representation of you, and that is going to be disseminated across the entire planet geographically, as well as into the future perpetually. So not only instead of you being on your soapbox in one geographic location at one time, you also now are going to be in 10,000 locations across the planet for literally infinitely longer and in the future. How do you price those two things? Well, if you're in the past, you're on your soapbox screaming to everyone to buy a fraction of the future, that's the best investment you could possibly make, is buying a share of that future productivity, right? And so that's what Bitcoin is, and this was a very, very long answer to your question about diminishing returns. But again, it comes down to what way are we talking about this, right? People that say in all forms we're going to see diminishing returns, I think are in denial because they're denying realities of the world, right? In terms of global percentage adoption, yes, absolutely. We are going to see diminishing returns very, very steeply. Number two, are we going to see diminishing returns nominally? No, I don't think so. And I think in a long time horizon, we're going to see exponentially increasing returns. Again, in nominal terms, so those matter at the least of these three. And the one that matters the most is technological innovation and deflation of prices because of future innovation and future productivity. And that, I believe, is not going to have diminishing returns. And if we think that there are diminishing returns there, then we probably have bigger things to worry about, like as a result of a war or some other conflict that has stifled human progress.
So I agree with your answer to part 1. I agree with your answer to part 2. I agree with your answer to part 3. I love the maths with the example about going to Mars and back. Brilliant. Right now we're in the city centre. Maybe Pam can pan around, no pun intended with the Pam/pan joke there. But as you can see, we have beautiful buildings all around us. We thought, let's try something different. I'm here with Luke.